act like I do.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We are thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and the presenter will answer those queries after the webinar today during our question and answer period today. If you ask a question in the chat box and we're not able to get to it, go ahead and leave your contact information, your email or your phone number, and we will make sure someone reaches out to you after the event to address that question. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'd love to introduce you to our presenter today. Yolanda Baker is a special needs mom, accountant, author, and medical debt reduction specialist. She's also involved in blockchain technology, having received a fintech certificate from Rice University. She enjoys reading and spending lots of time outside with her family and lives in Austin, Texas. And I am so excited to have you here, Yolanda. I'm going to go ahead and stop my sharing. You can go ahead and share your screen.
Great, thank you. All right, everybody. Hello again, my name is Yolanda Baker, and we're going to be talking about how to save on medical expenses. And I'm really excited about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin with a story. And I call it a love story, but it's a story about my son and how this started. When he was about 18 months, he was diagnosed with autism. And so at that time, my husband and I didn't have time to really think. We just did everything that was recommended to us. So we went to various specialists and therapists, got him on a special diet, took him to a school for special needs, and all these different types of treatments. And everything was going as planned. And there's my son during the first few months of his therapy. Everything was going as planned until our insurance denied almost all our claims. And until that point, my husband and I weren't really knowledgeable in the health insurance system. I mean, we did have when we were younger our cuts and scrapes, colds, but we never really had anything as monumental as my son's autism diagnosis. And so while that was going on, therapy still needed to continue. And so we used credit cards. I took out a loan. At one point, we maxed out our credit cards because I wanted to continue with the therapy. So during that time, and for the next few years, my husband and I, we could say fight, debated, pleaded, with our insurance company to cover these claims that we believed and then we verified to be legitimate covered claims. But again, it was a pretty hairy situation. It was pretty difficult for those few years. But something happened. You know, during the struggle, I decided to, with my accounting and taxation skills, decided to look into the tax code. And so I read that entire section. It's section 26 of the Internal Revenue Tax Code regarding medical and dental expenses. And from that, and from talking with special needs parents, getting advice, talking with other professionals, I wrote a book. and it was based on something called the Bite Your Bill system. And it was called the Smart Family's Guide to Healthcare Savings. And right now it's in its 5th edition. It is being rewritten, but I've been, for the past 12 plus years, I've been writing these books and helping families out with some very interesting questions, not just in regards to taxes, but in regards to other parts of what I call the medical financial system. So I know that there's a lot of financial advisors out there who are really, they really emphasize the future, such as your retirement plan. What will you do when you retire? And I was looking for, but I could never find anyone who really concentrated on the now, what to do now, and especially in regards to not just medical expenses, but other expenses in general. Financial advisors look to your past to prepare you for your future, but my main question is, who's there to help you right now? And so what I did was, from the experiences that I had and experiences from others, I created the Bite Your Bill system. And BITE is an acronym, and I consider it a year-round system. Some people that I know who've used the system use part of the system part of the time. Some people use the entire system year-round. And so let me talk a little bit about that, because I truly believe that this can help. It helped me personally, and it's helped many others that I've assisted with. So we have B for budget, I for insurance, specifically health insurance, T for taxes, and E for employer-sponsored health plans. They're also known as cafeteria plans. So let's talk briefly first about budgeting. So for me, budgeting is like dieting. Everybody has their own specific way of doing this. Some people use the specific carbohydrate diet or the paleo diet. So I look at budgeting the same way. If you like Dave Ramsey and you feel like this is the best method for you, you stick with that. I don't really have a specific budgeting method in my book to talk about. Some people prefer pen and paper, some people prefer software, whatever makes you comfortable in this process, because budgeting can be very stressful. And so one of the things I do recommend, however, is for any sort of medical issues for a particular individual in your house. It could be a chronically ill, a sibling, or could be a child, or it could be yourself. What you would want to do, and what I've done successfully, is to create either a savings or checking account specifically for that individual, or if it is a one-time event, just have a temporary account so that you can filter any sort of expenses and payments into that account, because it makes it easier either during tax time, or if you want those expenses reimbursed, you go to that particular account. It's much easier than putting everything into your main checking account and having to filter it, especially if there's a lot of expenses. So, excuse me, sorry, allergies. The second one is I, and that is health insurance. And so some of the things I talk about in my book, and some of the things you should look out for if you begin this journey, is to understand what explanation of benefits are, or EOB. And with the passage of certain laws that were created, I believe back in 2009, the explanation of benefits is now a uniform document that you receive from your health insurer. And it explains the charges, the deductibles, and it's, well, I believe it's a very easy to read document now. When I first started on this journey, it was extremely difficult to understand an explanation of benefits, because we did change insurers at one point. And by the time I understood one explanation of benefits, the next EOB that I got from the new insurer was completely different. But now they are pretty much uniform and should be easy enough to read. And I would highly encourage you to really study that and learn the terminology there. And so the second thing that I would recommend is your health insurance policy. And I'm not talking about the 15 to 20 page summary of benefits, there is actually, it really depends on the insurer. It could be as short as 80 pages long that I've seen, or it could be as long as 200 pages. But what I would recommend, and I know for some people it's a bit daunting, but I would recommend reading the entire health insurance policy, the full one. Some of them call it certificate of coverage. There might be other terms that they use, but you can request that through your human resources department. You can request a paper copy. You can request a digital copy. But I would recommend looking through that thoroughly and then figuring out what is covered in your insurance plan. And so that leads me to the next issue, because if you do read your insurance plan and it appears, it always appears, it's never verified until you get some expert help, or until you, what I call, and I'll talk about this later, when you escalate the issue with the manager at the health insurance customer service department. But not everything is set in stone in that health insurance policy. And what I mean by that is, there have been so many times when I looked at my policy and some things seemed contradictory. And so what I did, and what some of my clients do, is they get a medical claims advocate. There's other words, medical billing advocate. You could search online on Google for that. These are people that are experienced in handling denied medical claims, or if you have questions about your insurance policy in general. And so what I would advise is, if you feel a bit overwhelmed in that, to contact a medical claims advocate. And so we're going to talk a little bit about claims denial later, because it's one of the most frequently asked questions in my webinars. But real shortly, with claim denials, there's always this, for me and for the people that I speak with, there's always this psychological barrier, like you don't want to read the documents. And the best thing that I can advise you right now is, there are so many people who have faced this, and they've conquered it. They've been able to get their denials approved. And so again, we're going to talk a little bit about claim denials later. And so taxes. Now this, depending on the audience, I really get into the details for taxes. But because this is a general audience, what I'm going to say is that it is most likely that the majority of you listening to this will probably not qualify. Your threshold may be too low. Last year's 2021 tax year, unfortunately, the threshold was at 10%. For a while, Congress had approved 7.5%. And the lower your threshold, the more likely you would be able to get those medical expenses reimbursed. But for the majority of families that I speak to who do not have a chronically ill person in their family, usually they don't meet the threshold. And so I'll talk a little bit about this. Just know that if you do meet the threshold, you need to understand what a medical expense is in the eyes of the IRS. You also need to understand that not all medical expenses are deductible. And I do talk about that in my book. I can actually have a 2-hour webinar on just this section, but I know that it would be a cure for insomnia. So I'm not going to do that to you. Also, I do get quite a few questions about alternative medical procedures and treatments. And a lot of people think that they're not deductible, but they actually are. You just need to follow a few rules. And also you need to keep those receipts. Even if you are not going to prepare taxes, use those medical expenses for a deduction, I would still advise that you keep all of your medical receipts for possible future reimbursement through your company or through your health insurer or through your HSA. And I do talk about that in my book, about certain organizational techniques that I use. So we're going to go through this real quick, because again, I believe the majority of you may not qualify for the threshold, but in case you want to read this, all you need to do is go to irs.gov and search for publication 502, which is medical and dental expenses. And so what it is a medical expense is the cost of diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. It does not include things such as vitamins or taking a vacation to make yourself feel better. And again, like I said before, it does include certain holistic or alternative treatments. And I do talk about that in my book and try to, like a really quick example, most people think that chiropractic visits are not deductible. They actually are. But again, you have to follow a few rules about that. And so again, not every medical expense is deductible. So I always ask myself these three main questions. I say to myself, is this treatment covered by that definition that I just explained? Do I have a prescription or some sort of statement from my physician about the medical condition? And do I have the receipts or statements for this service or treatment? So there's other requirements. Those are the three that I think about whenever I have a medical expense. And so let's talk about the employer-sponsored health plans, also known as cafeteria plans, health savings account, flexible spending accounts. There are also other names that they use for that. Just like the health insurance plan that you have, I would highly recommend that you read your employer-sponsored benefit plan very carefully because there are quite a few medical procedures that are reimbursable. And what I tell my clients is, even though I know that they may have a threshold met for taxes for medical deductions, I always encourage them to use their HSA and to place the maximum amount allowable for your plan because it is much better to get the reimbursement right away versus waiting for that next tax year to get the deduction. And I would suggest doing that, depleting the HSA first before looking into the tax implications for deductions. So I want to talk about the most frequently asked question I receive, at least from my webinars, and it is, my health insurer denied my healthcare claim. What do I do now? And so what I would suggest is, again, going back to your health insurance plan and to read that 80 to 200 page document. And again, if you do feel a bit overwhelmed, there are some resources. Also, talking with your HR department. There is also someone called an ombudsman. I hope I'm saying that right. An ombudsman is someone who works for the health insurance company. So what I would do is listen to their recommendations, but I would also go outside of that if you still have issues or concerns. And one of the resources that is free that I found early in the process that has helped me tremendously is the Patient Advocate Foundation. And their website is patientadvocate.org. It is a very voluminous website. There are a lot of resources, but they were very helpful in assisting me with the process of getting these claims approved that were initially denied. And I can't say enough about these people. It's not a complete advocacy. It's not the complete puzzle. It's one piece of it, but I feel so strongly. I'm not being paid by them, but I can tell you that it has helped me more than once with questions that I had, not just about denials, but about why this procedure is acceptable and this one isn't. And they are just so helpful. You could contact them by phone or by chat, but I would highly recommend that you talk with them. So, second most asked question, what if I can't pay my medical bill? So my question is, the first thing you should ask is, what should I do with a medical bill? Because I found, and most of my families have found, that sometimes when I read my bill, It's actually for services that we never did. Sometimes the medical coding is wrong. Sometimes the procedure is it's the correct procedure, but we're being overcharged. And there was a certain time, there was a point that I got into this where I knew that a bill was just wrong. I knew that the coding was wrong, that the procedure was incorrect, or the price was wrong. It was from a different provider sometimes. So always look at your bills and always question them. The other, it's like a psychological barrier, but the other issue is open and read your bill as soon as possible. There were times where I just would just put my mail to the side and not want to deal with it. But I would really encourage you that no matter what happens, you got to take that first step and open that bill, because even if it's not news you want to hear, there are resources out there to help you. So don't delay, because you do not want to go into collections. You want to talk with the billing department on the bill as soon as possible to confirm the charges. And then from there, if you're not satisfied or if you need more help, again, there's the Patient Advocacy Foundation. There are also a couple of other things you can do. Is if it is a hospital bill, what I would recommend is contacting the customer service or billing department. And regardless of your income or financial situation, I would always request information about financial assistance. Some hospitals call it charity care. Some other hospitals have other terms for it, but I would advise that to contact them as soon as possible and ask to see some sort of application for financial assistance. You may have to escalate this to a manager, because some of the, we're all human, and the customer service department, they're there to try to help you, but they're also there, they're being paid by the hospitals or the medical or your medical provider. And so there might be some issues with you not getting the information that you need. So you may need to escalate. And I do have additional resources, not only in my book, but you can contact me and I have free resources to help you out in that situation. So I talked about future plans that I have, and I won't go into this too much, but I am reaching out. I am expanding my business beyond just assisting people with medical expenses. And so I can talk about that at a later webinar. And if you wish to contact me about that, I'd be happy to help you. But I want to thank you for listening in. I know sometimes this can be overwhelming. I'm a special needs mom. I know what it's like. I'm still continuing with this medical billing struggle. So I know what it's like, and I'm here to help. We're all here to help. Advice Chaser is to help. I'm here to help. And if you have any questions, please let us know now. And thank you so much.
Helps if I unmute myself. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I do have some questions here, and I want to tell attendees, if you have some other questions, go ahead and pop those in the chat as we get to the questions I've gathered already. Can you explain the difference between what an HSA and an FSA is?
Health savings account versus flexible savings account. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, although there are some procedures in a flexible spending account that you cannot use for a health savings account. And each one differs, they can differ wildly. It really depends. And that is something that you will need to speak with your HR department about. But the main differences that I see between the HSA and FSA is that FSAs can be used for other things, such as I've heard parents use it for special education tuition. But again, each flexible spending account program differs from another. And so that is something that you will need to look through your brochure, to talk with your HR department about. I can't give you the specifics because, again, they just differ wildly. So I hope that answered the question.
All right. So talk to us a little more about that bank account that you set aside. Can it be something other than like a savings or a checking account?
Well, I actually created that. That was an idea that I had. I thought, why not use a separate checking or savings account? Um, However, there are some people, and I did not talk about this in the webinar because I'm not an expert in this, but I know quite a few families, not just special needs families, but other families with children with chronic conditions use something called an ABLE account, ABLE. And this is something that not just the parents or the individuals can contribute, but you can have grandparents, you can have friends contribute to the ABLE account. But again, I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't really get into it. But that is another tool that you can use besides a savings or checking account. And I would advise that you look into that. I think it would really help.
The question here is, can you use a credit card account, a credit card to put all your medical expenses on a credit card account?
Yes, you can use just a regular credit card. There are some credit cards out there that are specific to medical expenses, but if at all possible, please don't, especially those that are specifically designed for medical expenses, because those I've seen rates as high as 40%. And, I know it would be tempting to use, but if at all possible, and I hope that my webinar provided you with enough information to try to find other alternatives to credit cards. But I totally understand that because I used credit cards. It was, like I said, it wasn't a great time because we had to pay those credit card bills. But through my experiences, I was able to get out of the credit card debt and to use other techniques to pay for medical expenses.
All right, thank you very much. I have some great questions here. Is there a way to check costs of medical procedures in advance? And I would also say prescriptions, and to help shop around before you engage in those procedures or make those purchases.
Let me talk about prescriptions first. There's some great apps out there that can help you look. You can actually figure out, depending on the medication, how much it would cost at a particular pharmacy. I don't have any particular apps that I could recommend, but if you all go into like a Walgreens or CVS, sometimes what you'll see at the counter are these cards, and I wonder if I have one right here in my wallet. They're very brightly colored, so you can't miss it. Here it is. I'm going to cover the company, but they usually have this, you can save this much on your prescriptions. And so if you find that, it doesn't hurt to ask, but see how much the prescription would cost versus using your health insurance. That's one thing you could do. Now, in regards to the hospital visits and procedures and expenses, there are some apps out there that can help you, but they're very limited. That is the one thing that I find most frustrating in this, because, when you go to get an estimate to repair your house or an estimate for getting your car engine repaired, they give you the estimate up front, but hospitals don't do that. They're very reluctant. Sometimes you get the runaround. And I'm not saying every hospital does that, but it is extremely difficult to find the cost of a particular procedure beforehand, because there are so many times where even if you are prepared and you go into the hospital and do the procedure, you're still stuck with what I call a surprise bill, because you find out that although everyone in the surgical team was within your network, you find out the anesthesiologist was not. And so you're paying additional costs for someone who was not part of your insurance. And so there is a reluctancy, there's hesitancy for most hospitals to offer that information. Although if you do come across that kind of roadblock, I think at that point, a billing advocate, a medical billing advocate is a good person to speak to. Also, again, Patient Advocacy Foundation, can't get enough of that website. You might be able to get the information there too. But I unfortunately, asking for the cost ahead of time, it's an uphill battle.
All right, here's another question. What is the best thing to do in the event of a major medical diagnosis such as cancer?
Well, you know, and I'm going to talk about my personal experience because it was a shock to us. And we kind of went blindly with whatever procedure and technique and new diet. You know, we were chasing at some points dead ends, and we really didn't have time to sit down and just breathe and take it all in and try to look for help outside, such as a medical billing advocate or just maybe a therapist to talk to. We never really did that. We just went in head first, and thank goodness it did work out for the better for us. But you know, dealing with medical expenses is extremely stressful. And what I would recommend for a diagnosis that is as for medical diagnosis like cancer or something similar, um, I would advise getting as much assistance as possible, not just financial assistance, but maybe help from a therapy group and talking with your doctor about not just about advice for the health issues, but perhaps they know someone who's a medical billing advocate, getting information ahead of time about if you have future chemotherapy visits, talking with the medical office about how much the procedure might cost, talking with the actual clinic there who does the chemotherapy about cost. And also another important thing is having a personal advocate on your side, such as a spouse or a relative, because I know, especially with cancer, there might be times where the brain fog is so intense that you can forget important information. And so the one thing I would advise over everything else is to try to find what I call a personal advocate on your side, someone who can write down notes for you during your visit, someone who could find documents for you. And so that would really help with any sort of financial issues you may have in the future. I hope that helped. I hope that was an adequate answer to your question. And if you are dealing with that diagnosis, I wish you luck. And of course, you can always contact me or Advice Chaser for other information.
Can you talk a little bit more about what is deductible? I've heard that some diets and schooling can be deductible. Can you talk about that?
And I'm going to use a term that a lot of CPAs and accountants use. It depends, okay? It depends on the situation. It depends on the diagnosis. I'm going to give you my example. We put our son on a what we call a specific carbohydrate diet, and that was approved by our physician. So what we did was we took out a lot of food, including dairy, no casein. And because of that, we had to purchase things such as almond milk, coconut milk. And what I did, and I do have an Excel spreadsheet available to where I created a spreadsheet to where I enter in the almond milk's price versus a regular gallon of milk's price. And that difference is the actual deductible part that you can use in your tax return. Now, again, I'm not giving you any sort of tax advice. I'm just a special needs mom talking to you person to person about what I did. In regards to special education or therapeutic education, that depends because I have done some research and I've looked at various tax court cases and found that certain types of therapies and certain types of schools are covered, but others are not. And I'm going to give you an example. And tax court cases are used to present to the IRS in case you have issues getting something covered as deductible. So you can use this with the help of your CPA if it ever comes to this point. But I'll give you an example. There was a tax court case, I believe this was in the early 90s, in which a father had admitted his son into a military camp because his son had been showing aggressive behaviors. And even though he did get a diagnosis, I forgot what the exact diagnosis was, by a psychiatrist, the IRS determined it was not deductible because the school itself was not designed to help with therapeutic issues. So if you had a school, and I'm going to give you an example, there was a school in South Austin that my son attended, and they have what they call ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis Therapist. They had speech therapists, they had occupational therapists. And the goal of this school was to treat children with intellectual disabilities such as autism and Down syndrome. It was on their pamphlets, it was on their website. That's what their focus was. And because of that, my husband and I were able to fully deduct the cost of that school. So again, it really depends on what the schools, what they are there for, what their goals are for the child, and whether or not they have those certified therapists to help treat your child. So I'm sorry I can't give you an exact answer to the school that you might be interested in, but I have found that if a school has a goal of treating the child for certain issues, but for certain medical conditions, that may be deductible. And again, I'm sorry I can't give specifics, but I hope that answered the question.
That gives us a little bit more of guidelines. Thank you. This is a question about someone having a recent hospitalization and they had to for their minor child for several weeks, and there were of course travel and lodging expenses that the parents had to incur because the child was in the hospital. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, and I want to preface again what I stated before, that before you look into tax deductions, try to see if these expenses can be reimbursed through your HSA or FSA, because depending on what the travel was for, you may get that covered. It might be covered through your HSA, but again, each individual FSA is different. And so I would advise looking through that and seeing if that's covered. But food and lodging, not 100%, but food and lodging can be a deductible expense depending on what it was used for. It can also be used for medical conferences. If you had to travel to attend a medical conference, as an example, I traveled out of state to attend a medical and autism conference for my child. And I was able to show to the IRS that this was a conference that pertained to my son's medical condition. And because of that, it was deductible. But you have to be very careful about that. And I would advise reading that section of Publication 502, or talking with a medical billing advocate about that, or your tax preparer about that if you wish to deduct that in your tax return. But again, I have seen that in some of my clients' HSA's brochures, that medical conferences and hotel and food may be reimbursed through the HSA. But again, please check your own individual plan and hopefully it's covered.
So talk a little bit more about that 7.5 or 10%. Someone's asking, with the standard deduction so much higher in the recent years, does it even make sense to itemize?
And that's why I always recommend, especially if I'm in a webinar with a general audience versus a special needs audience, I always recommend that you first use, and I guess the best word to use is deplete, to use up your HSA as much as possible and to use the maximum amount before you even consider tax deductions. because again, it's a matter of time. Getting reimbursed through your HSA for medical deductions, you'll be able to get that quicker than, say, having to wait half or most of the year for tax season to get that information, to put it into the tax software or given to your CPA, and eventually getting part of that deduction as part of your refund, or lowering your tax liability if you owe. Yeah, the 10% threshold, I really wished that they kept it at 7.5, because at least at 7.5, most families have a fighting chance of getting a deduction. But now at 10%, I really recommend that people look at other means before they think about using it as a deduction, that is, getting it reimbursed. Try to find ways of getting that reimbursed versus waiting for a deduction.
Someone asked, have you had better experience with some insurance companies versus others? Of course, we're not going to tell you, go through all the insurance companies, but I would like you to tell us a little more about like what it's like working with one insurance company versus another.
Okay, so from my experience, my personal experience and experiences with other families, they do vary. And like I said, we did go through more than one health insurer during this process. And it was a very interesting experience for one of the insurers that I will not name. But this is what I would recommend, regardless of what health insurance company you have. After you've read the complete health insurance policy, the 80 to 200 page document, and also maybe talking with a medical billing advocate for advice or the PAF for advice, what I would recommend is the same thing, regardless of what insurer you have. Have a pen and paper ready. Write down the time and who you spoke to and the phone number. Describe the call, what it was about. If the call does not go your way, or if you feel dissatisfied with how the call is being handled, you can always escalate to a manager. You can always escalate the manager. There are procedures that the health insurance companies have that are uniform. That is, you can file you can appeal your denial, the denial claims. And there's a certain procedure that all health insurance policies must do in regards to the denials. And my husband and I, as an example, with one of our insurers, we actually took it to what we call a third level when we had our claims denied for the third time. And from there, we were able to get some information from our neurologist and from an ABA therapist about why our son's denial should be covered. And this took about a year. This particular situation took about a year. But after going to what we call third level of denial, it was accepted. And so what I would suggest is, no matter how difficult it is to go through that process with your health insurer, I would say go to a higher level, that is a manager or their manager. Go through the process, because there is written documents showing you how to fight the denial, and you could go through the certain levels. Get a medical claims advocate or medical billing advocate on your side, because this is going to be real technical. It's not going to look like English when you read it at times. So regardless of what insurer you have, always question the bill, always get verification. And if you're not satisfied, always escalate it. Make sure you have the documentation of everybody that you spoke to, because I will tell you, again, as a personal example, I've written down every conversation I've had with my insurance company, health insurance company. And there was one incident in which they claimed that, no, we can't cover this. And I said, well, you know what? On October 16th, at this time, I spoke with Reggie, and he said that this was going to be looked at because it looked like it was covered. And then the mic was covered. And then the agent said, can you hold on, please. So I held on, which seemed like an eternity. It was only a few minutes, but the manager came on and I explained to them, look, this is what happened on this date. I did call and I did get this confirmed. And then they said, well, we're going to give you our written response. And the mail came in a few days later and they approved it. So don't ever give up. Always write down as much as you can about the calls and politely but firmly escalate if needed. I hope that was as complete an answer as I can give you. Thank you.
We have time for one more
Great.
question, and then we'll let you go. And I want to thank all of our attendees for putting these great questions in. So if the health insurance 20-page certificate of coverage isn't always accurate, subject to change, why even read that? Can we just argue with the health insurance company?
And so the 20-page, that nice little summary you get is not the complete picture. I would strongly recommend that you get, what I do is I always get the paper copy because I can highlight it, I can write notes. If you do get it online, you can always print it out, but you are entitled to a paper copy of the full certificate of coverage, which again is unfortunately between 80 to 200 pages. And it is, I believe that can be a cure for insomnia too, but the best advice I can give is read it, understand it, get help if you don't understand certain things. You could go online and search for certain terms, but if it gets a little overwhelming, talk with a billing advocate or the PAF, and they're experts. They've seen hundreds of these different plans and they know what they're about. Sometimes the language is contradictory. And again, this is where that advocate comes in and can hopefully help you verify what is covered and what is not. And sometimes, again, I've seen it. I've seen it with my families. I've looked through their certificate of coverage and I'm thinking, wait a minute, on this page it says this is not covered, but on this page it says that it is. There is contradictory information sometimes in those certificates of coverage. And so I would advise just take a deep breath. You can do this. Read the full certificate, understand it, and always get help when you need it.
Well, with that, I think we are going to have to end our webinar. I'm sure we could probably fill another hour or two with you,
Yes.
Yolanda, but we appreciate you being here and we appreciate all these great questions from our audience today. I want to thank the organizations that have made this webinar possible, and to our attendees, look for a replay soon with a link to watch the replay of this event. And you're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.